The stealth mechanic in Mercenaries is one of the most confusing and nuanced aspects of the game that is directly relevant for speedruns. It's also a topic that none of us in the community fully understand yet. I'll try to cover it as briefly as possible, because there's a decent chance I'll have to remake this video at some point once new information becomes available. To the best of our understanding, Mercenaries has a stealth mechanic similar to the Metal Gear franchise. Each AI has a cone of vision, and if the player is not directly within that cone of vision, the AI cannot witness the player. More on witnessing later. The cone itself is quite narrow and shallow. I'd say no more than 20 degrees wide and 50 meters deep. Once an AI is aggroed, like after you shoot them, I think their cone of vision is expanded by quite a bit, which enables enemies to aim at you from long distances. The AI can also hear your footsteps and your gunfire, and some weapons are louder than others. As discussed in my fundamentals video on character selection, Mui has a stealth buff, which, as far as we can tell, is essentially just that AI cannot hear her footsteps. One surprising facet of this system is that enemy cones of vision actually rotate along with the movement of their heads. So, even if a North Korean troop is standing facing forward, they can turn their head side to side in order to spot the player. This also means that if you kill AI during animations where they're nodding off or just generally not looking directly at the player, it may not count as a reputation loss. Quick side note, you can silence your footsteps with Jacobs and Matthias as well by crouch walking. In vehicles, the stealth system appears to function a little differently. Enemies seem to have a bubble inside of which they will automatically detect the player, and this bubble is drastically bigger in a helicopter than it is in ground vehicles. It also appears to be unaffected by the character you've chosen, as does the disguise mechanic. Speaking of the disguise mechanic, I'll cover that quickly before explaining how the witness system impacts speedruns. As far as we can tell, the disguise mechanic functions like this. While in a vehicle, the game checks whether you are currently being witnessed by an aggroed, faction-aligned AI. If you are not, the game will grant you a disguise. If you are, the game will set a flag that your disguise has been spoiled. At this point, if you travel 100 meters away from where your disguise was spoiled without another aggroed AI spotting you, the game will grant you a new disguise. Note, this distance must be traveled in the X or Z directions. Ascending on the Y-axis in a helicopter, for example, will not work. You can sometimes get what I call fake disguises too. The game will say you're disguised immediately upon entering a vehicle, but you won't actually be disguised. Once you get a disguise for real though, this bug fixes itself. Other than that, I think the disguise system is relatively straightforward and reliable. Sometimes it can feel bugged, but I suspect this is actually due to the wonky nature of the witness system. There are a lot of strategies in Merc speedruns that rely on gaming the witness system, most importantly being contract warps. As I mentioned in my fundamentals video on contract warping, the fastest and easiest way to warp in many cases is to kill a member of the faction you're working for during a contract fadeout. In order for this to work though, your kill must be witnessed by a member of the faction that you're attempting to turn hostile. Interestingly, the AI you're killing can actually serve as their own witness. This means that if you take a faction-aligned AI into the middle of nowhere and then kill them while they are facing you, you will lose 20 reputation points with that faction. This is very useful for speedruns because it means that we can tote around a single faction member in scout helicopters and then kill them during the contract fadeout to warp into the next contract. There are caveats to this system. For one, enemies in enclosed vehicles, which excludes most gunners, cannot serve as witnesses. This means that, for example, you must get a passenger out of your helicopter if you want that kill to count for a reputation loss. Similarly, if you have an enemy truck, for example, that has an open space gunner and a driver, and you want both kills to count as reputation losses, you need to kill the driver first and then the gunner, so that the gunner can witness both of the kills. Another consideration, if the AI in question is currently aggroed by another faction in the area, your killing them may not result in a reputation loss. I believe this is the game's way of forgiving accidental friendly fire during a firefight, but it's pretty inconsistent, so I'm not really sure what's going on here. This behavior can make contract warps challenging. Take the Jack of Clubs contract, for example. The fastest way to execute a warp is to bring a Mafia soldier with you and shoot him after you capture the jack. The problem is, if he is not looking directly at you when you kill him, or he's currently aggroed by another faction, including North Korea, the kill will usually not contribute to a reputation loss with the Mafia. As I mentioned earlier, AI seem to detect you more reliably when you're in a vehicle, especially helicopters. It's not always an option, but I've found that shooting or running over faction members from a vehicle is usually the most reliable way to intentionally lose reputation with a faction. Destroying HQs and key structures is another action that requires a witness to lower your reputation with a faction. This is important for tax evasion and contract warps in some categories. Not all tools of destruction are created equal here. While AT missiles, C4, and frag grenades seem to reliably produce witnesses, RPGs often don't work. I'm not exactly sure why. I also haven't yet determined if the HQ guard can count as a witness, but I'm leaning toward yes. Contrary to killing faction members and destroying HQs, killing civilians does not require witnesses to lower your reputation with the Allies, South Korea, or China. This makes it a preferred choice when possible for doing warps with these factions. Even still, sometimes killing civilians will randomly and inexplicably not result in any reputation loss, though this is pretty rare. Needless to say, there's a lot about the witness system we don't understand. While intentionally losing reputation by killing soldiers has been made generally consistent, we still don't exactly understand all of the criteria that constitute a witness in-game. With how fleshed out this stealth system is, I suspect that the developers initially intended for it to play a key role in gameplay, but either due to time constraints or a tonal change in direction for the title, that system was more or less relegated to the sidelines, to the point where some players may not even notice it. Again, this video will probably need updating in the future with new info we discover, but hopefully this gives you a baseline understanding of exactly what's going on when you try to execute contract warps or manipulate reputation while playing Mercenaries.